Then Tuor bowed in reverence, for it seemed to him that he beheld a mighty king. A tall crown he wore like silver, from which his long hair fell down as foam glimmering in the dusk. And as he cast back the grey mantle that hung about him like a mist, behold, he was clad in a gleaming coat, close fitted as the mail of a mighty fish, and in a kirtle of deep green that flashed and flickered with sea fire as he strode slowly towards the land. In this manner the dweller of the deep, whom the Noldor name Ulmo, Lord of Waters, showed himself to Tuor, son of Huor, of the house of Hedor, beneath Vinyamar. He set no foot upon the shore, but standing knee-deep in the shadowy sea he spoke to Tuor, and then for the light of his eyes and for the sound of his deep voice that came as it seemed from the foundations of the world, fear fell upon Tuor, and he cast himself down upon the sand. "Arise, Tuor, son of Huor," said Ulmo. "Fear not my wrath, though long have I called to thee unheard, and setting out at last thou hast tarried on thy journey hither. In the spring thou shouldest have stood here, but now a fell winter cometh soon from the land of the enemy. Haste thou must learn, and the pleasant road that I designed for thee must be changed. For my counsels have been scorned, and a great evil creeps upon the valley of Sirion, and already a host of foes is come between thee and thy goal." "What then is my goal, Lord?" said Tuor. "That which thy heart hath ever sought," answered Ulmo, "to find Turgon, and to look upon the hidden city. For thou art arrayed thus to be my messenger, even in the arms which long ago I decreed for thee. Yet now thou must under shadow pass through peril. Wrap thyself therefore in this cloak, and cast it never aside until thou come to thy journey's end." Then it seemed to Tuor that Ulmo parted his grey mantle and cast to him a lappet, and as it fell upon him, it was for him a great cloak wherein he might wrap himself over all, from head to foot. "Thus thou shalt walk under my shadow," said Ulmo, "but tarry no more, for in the lands of Anar and in the fires of Melkor it will not endure. Wilt thou take up my errand?" "I will, Lord," said Tuor. "Then I will set words in thy mouth to say unto Turgon," said Ulmo. "But first I will teach thee, and some things thou shalt hear which no man else hath heard, nay, not even the mighty among the Eldar." And Ulmo spoke to Tuor of Valinor and its darkening, and the exile of the Noldor, and the doom of Mandos, and the hiding of the blessed realm. "But behold," said he, "in the armour of fate, as the children of earth name it, there is ever a rift, and in the walls of doom a breach, until the full making, which ye call the end. So it shall be while I endure. A secret voice that gainsayeth, and a light where darkness was decreed. Therefore, though in the days of this darkness I seem to oppose the will of my brethren, the lords of the West, that is my part among them, to which I was appointed ere the making of the world. Yet doom is strong, and the shadow of the enemy lengthens, and I am diminished, until in Middle Earth I am become now no more than a secret whisper. The waters that run westward wither, and their springs are poisoned, and my powers withdraw from the land. For elves and men grow blind and deaf to me because of the might of Melkor. And now the curse of Mandos hastens to its fulfillment, and all the works of the Noldor shall perish, and every hope which they build shall crumble. The last hope alone is left, and hope that they have not looked for and have not prepared, and that hope lieth in thee, for so I have chosen. Then shall Turgon not stand against Morgoth, as all the elder yet hope? said Tuor. And what wouldst thou of me, lord, if I come now to Turgon? For though I am indeed willing to do as my father, and stand by that king in his need, yet of little avail shall I be, a mortal man alone, among so many and so valiant of the high folk of the West. If I choose to send thee, Tuor son of Huor, then believe not that thy one sword is not worth sending. For the valour of the Edain the elves shall ever remember as the ages lengthen, marvelling that they gave life so freely of which they had on earth so little. But it is not for thy valour only that I send thee, but to bring into the world a hope beyond thy sight, and a light that shall pierce the darkness. And as Ulmo said these things, the mutter of the storm rose to a great cry, and the wind mounted, and the sky grew black, and the mantle of the Lord of Waters streamed out like a flying cloud. Go now, lest the sea devour thee, for Osse obeys the will of Mandos, and he is wroth, being a servant of the doom. As thou commandest, said Tuor, but if I escape the doom, what word shall I say unto Turgon? If thou come to him, answered Ulmo, then the word shall arise in thy mind, and thy mouth shall speak as I would. Speak and fear not, and thereafter do as thy heart and valour lead thee. Hold fast my mantle, for thus shalt thou be guarded. And I shall send one to thee out of the wrath of Osse, and thus shalt thou be guided, yea, the last mariner of the last ship that shall seek into the west until the rising of the star. Go now back to the land. Then there was a noise of thunder, and lightning flared over the sea, and Tuor beheld Ulmo standing among the waves as a tower of silver flickering with darting flames, and he cried against the wind, I go, lord, yet now my heart yearneth rather to the sea. And thereupon Ulmo lifted up a mighty horn, and blew upon it a single great note, to which the roaring of the storm was but a wind-flaw upon a lake. And as he heard that note, and was encompassed by it, and filled with it, it seemed to Tuor that the coasts of Middle-earth vanished, and he surveyed all the waters of the world in a great vision, from the veins of the lands to the mouths of the rivers, and from the strands and estuaries out into the deep. The great sea he saw through its unquiet regions, teeming with strange forms, even to its lightless depths, in which, amid the everlasting darkness, there echoed voices terrible to mortal ears. Its measureless plains he surveyed with the swift sight of the Valar, lying windless under the eye of Anna, or glittering under the horned moon, or lifted in hills of wrath that broke upon the shadowy isles, until remote upon the edge of sight, and beyond the count of leagues, he glimpsed a mountain, rising beyond his mind's reach into a shining cloud, and at its feet a long surf glimmering. And even as he strained to hear the sound of those far waves, and to see clear that distant light, the note ended, and he stood beneath the thunder of the storm, and lightning many-branched rent asunder the heavens above him, and Ulmo was gone, and the sea was in tumult, as the wild waves of Osse rode against the walls of Nevrast. Then Tuor fled from the fury of the sea, and with labour he won his way back to the high terraces, for the wind drove him against the cliff, and when he came out upon the top it bent him to his knees. Therefore he entered again the dark and empty hall for shelter, and he sat night long in the stone seat of Turgon. The very pillars trembled for the violence of the storm, and it seemed to Tuor that the wind was full of wailing and wild cries. Yet being weary he slept at times, and his sleep was troubled with many dreams, of which naught remained in waking memory save one, a vision of an isle, and in the midst of it was a steep mountain, and behind it the sun went down, and the shadows sprang into the sky, but above it there shone a single dazzling star. After this dream Tuor fell into a deep sleep, for before the night was over the tempest passed, driving the black clouds into the east of the world. He awoke at length in the grey light, and arose, and left the high seat, and as he went down the dim hall, he saw that it was filled with sea-birds driven in by the storm, and he went out as the last stars were fading in the west before the coming day. Then he saw that the great waves in the night had ridden high upon the land, and had cast their crests above the cliff tops, and weed and shingle drift were flung even upon the terraces before the doors. And Tuor looked down from the lowest terrace, and saw, leaning against its wall among the stones and the sea-wrack, an elf, clad in a grey cloak sodden with the sea. Silent he sat, gazing beyond the ruin of the beaches out over the long ridges of the waves. All was still, and there was no sound save the roaring of the surf below. As Tuor stood and looked at the silent grey figure, he remembered the words of Ulmo, and a name untaught came to his lips, and he called aloud, "Welcome, Voronwe, I await you." Then the elf turned and looked up, and Tuor met the piercing glance of his sea-grey eyes, and knew that he was of the high folk of the Noldor. But fear and wonder grew in his gaze as he saw Tuor standing high upon the wall above him, clad in his great cloak, like a shadow out of which the elven mail gleamed upon his breast. A moment thus they stayed, each searching the face of the other, and then the elf stood up and bowed low before Tuor's feet. "Who are you, lord?" he said. "Long have I laboured in the unrelenting sea. Tell me, have great tidings befallen since I walked the land? Is the shadow overthrown? Have the hidden people come forth?" "Nay," said Tuor, "the shadow lengthens, and the hidden remain hid." Then Voronwe looked at him long in silence. "But who are you?" he asked again. "For many years ago my people left this land, and none have dwelt here since, and now I perceive that despite your raiment you are not of them, as I thought. But are you of their kindred of men?" "I am," said Tuor. "And are you not the last mariner of the last ship that sought the west from the havens of Círdan?" "I am," said the elf. "Voronwe, son of Aranwe, am I. But how you know my name and fate I understand not." "I know, for the Lord of Waters spoke to me yestereve," answered Tuor, "and he said that he would save you from the wrath of Osse, and send you hither to be my guide." Then in fear and wonder Voronwe cried, "You have spoken with Ulmo the Mighty? Then great indeed must be your worth and doom. But whither should I guide you, lord? For surely a king of men you must be, and many must wait upon your word." "Nay, I am an escaped thrall," said Tuor, "and I am an outlaw alone in an empty land. But I have an errand to Turgon, the hidden king. Know you by what road I may find him?" "Many are outlaw and thrall in these evil days who were not born so," answered Voronwe. "A lord of men by right you are, I deem. But were you the highest of all your folk, no right would you have to seek Turgon, and vain would be your quest, for even were I to lead you to his gates, you could not enter in." "I do not bid you lead me further than the gate," said Tuor. "There doom shall strive with the counsel of Ulmo." and if Turgon will not receive me, then my errand will be ended, and doom shall prevail. But as for my right to seek Turgon, I am Tuor, son of Huor, and kin of Hurin. Names Turgon will not forget, and I will seek also by the command of Umo. Will Turgon forget that which he spoke to him of old? Remember that the last hope of the Noldor cometh from the sea. Or again, when peril is nigh, one shall come from Nevras to warn thee. I am he that should come, and I am arrayed thus in the gear that was prepared for me. Tuor marvelled to hear himself speak so, for the words of Ulmo to Turgon at his going from Nevrast were not known to him before, nor to any save the hidden people. Therefore the more amazed was Voronwe, but he turned away and looked toward the sea, and he sighed. Alas, he said, I wish never again to return, and often have I vowed in the deeps of the sea that if I ever set foot on the land again, I would dwell at rest far from the shadow in the north, by the havens of Círdan, or maybe in the fair fields of Nantathrin, where the spring is sweeter than heart's desire. But if evil has grown while I have wandered, and the last peril approaches them, then I must go to my people. He turned back to Tuor. I will lead you to the hidden gates, he said, for the wise will not gainsay the counsels of Ulmo. Then we will go together, as we are counselled, said Tuor, but mourn not Voronwe. For my heart says to you that far from the shadow your long road shall lead you, and your hope shall return to the sea. And yours also, said Voronwe. But now we must leave it, and go in haste. Yea, said Tuor, but whither will you lead me, and how far? Shall we not first take thought how we may fare in the wild, or if the way be long, how pass the harbourless winter? But Voronwe would answer nothing clearly concerning the road. You know the strength of men, he said. As for me, I am of the Noldor, and long must be the hunger and cold the winter that shall slay the kin of those who pass the grinding ice. Yet how think you that we could labour countless days in the salt wastes of the sea? Or have you not heard of the way-bread of the elves? And I keep still that which all mariners hold unto the last. Then he showed beneath its cloak a sealed wallet clasped upon his belt. No water nor weather will harm it while it is sealed, but we must husband it until great need, and doubtless an outlaw and hunter may find other food ere the year worsens. May be, said Tuor, but not in all lands is it safe to hunt, be the game never so plentiful, and hunters tarry on the road. Now Tuor and Voronwe made ready to depart. Tuor took with him the small bow and arrows that he had brought, beside the gear that he had taken from the hall, but his spear, upon which his name was written in the elven runes of the north, he set upon the wall in token that he had passed. No arms had Voronwe save a short sword only. Before the day was broad, they left the ancient dwelling of Turgon, and Voronwe led Tuor about, westward of the steep slopes of Taras, and across the great cape. There once the road from Nevrast to Borithambar had passed, that now was but a green track between old turf-clad dikes. So they came into Beleriand, and the north region of the Falas, and turning eastward, they sought the dark eaves of Eridwethrin, and there they lay hid and rested until day had waned to dusk. For though the ancient dwellings of the Falathrim, Brithambar and Eglarest were still far distant, orcs now dwelt there, and all the land was infested by the spies of Morgoth. He feared the ships of Círdan that would come at times raiding to the shores, and join with the forays sent forth from Nargothrond. Now, as they sat shrouded in their cloaks as shadows under the hills, Tuor and Vorunwe spoke much together, and Tuor questioned Vorunwe concerning Turgon. But Vorunwe would tell little of such matters, and spoke rather of the dwellings upon the Isle of Bala, and of the Lisgard, the land of reeds at the mouth of Sirion. There now the numbers of the Eldar increase, he said, for evermore flee thither of either kin from the fear of Morgoth, weary of war. But I forsook not my people of my own choice. For after the Bragolach and the breaking of the siege of Angband, doubt first came to Turgon's heart that Morgoth might prove too strong. In that year he sent out the first of his folk that passed his gates from within, a few only, upon a secret errand. They went down Sirion to the shores about the mouths, and there built ships, but it availed them nothing, save to come to the great Isle of Bala, and there to establish lonely dwellings, far from the reach of Morgoth. For the Noldor have not the art of building ships that will long endure the waves of Belagir the Great. But when later Turgon heard of the ravaging of the Falas and the sack of the ancient havens of the shipwrights that lie away there before us, and it was told that Círdan had saved a remnant of his people and sailed away south to the Bay of Bala, then he sent out messages anew. That was but a little while ago, yet it seems in memory the longest portion of my life, for I was one of those that he sent, being young in years among the Eldar. I was born here in Middle-earth, in the land of Nevrast. My mother was of the grey elves of the Falas, and akin to Círdan himself. There was much mingling of the peoples in Nevrast in the first days of Turgon's kinship, and I have the sea heart of my mother's people. Therefore I was among the chosen, since our errand was to Círdan, to seek his aid in our shipbuilding, that some message and prayer for aid might come to the lords of the West ere all was lost. But I tarried on the way, for I had seen little of the lands of Middle-earth, and we came to Nan Tathrin in the spring of the year. Lovely to heart's enchantment is that land, Tuor, as you shall find, if ever your feet go upon the southward road down towards Sirion. There is the cure of all sea longing, save for those whom doom will not release. There Ulmo is but the servant of Yavanna, and the earth has brought to life a wealth of fair things that is beyond the thought of hearts, and in the hard hills of the north. In that land Narog joins Sirion, and they haste no more, but flow broad and quiet through living meads, and all about the shining river are flag lilies, like a blossoming forest, and the grass is filled with flowers like gems, like bells, like flames of red and gold, like a waste of many-coloured stars in a firmament of green. Yet fairest of all are the willows of Nan Tathrin, pale green or silver in the wind, and the rustle of their innumerable leaves is a spell of music. Day and night would flicker by uncounted, while still I stood knee-deep in grass and listened. There I was enchanted, and forgot the sea in my heart. There I wandered, naming new flowers, or lay a dream amid the singing of the birds, and the humming of bees and flies. There I might still dwell in delight, forsaking all my kin, whether the ships of the Teleri or the swords of the Noldor. But my doom would not so, or the Lord of Waters himself may be, for he was strong in that land. Thus it came into my heart to make a raft of willow boughs, and move upon the bright bosom of Sirion, and so I did, and so I was taken. For on a day, as I was in the midst of the river, a sudden wind came and caught me, and bore me away out of the land of willows down to the sea. Thus I came last of the messengers to Círdan, and of the 7 ships that he built at Turgon's asking, all but one were then full wrought. and one by one they set sail into the west, and none yet has ever returned, nor has any news of them been heard. But the salt air of the sea now stirred anew the heart of my mother's kin within me, and I rejoiced in the waves, learning all ship lore, as were it already stored in the mind. So when the last ship and the greatest was made ready, I was eager to be gone, saying within my thought, if the words of the Noldor be true, then in the west there are meads with which the land of willows cannot compare. There is no withering nor any end of spring, and perhaps even I, Boronwe, may come thither. And at the worst to wander on the waters is better far than the shadow in the north. And I feared not, for the ships of the Teleri no water may drown. But the great sea is terrible, Tuor, son of Huor, and it hates the Noldor, for it works the doom of the Valar. Worse things it holds than to sink into the abyss and so perish. Loathing and loneliness and madness, terror of wind and tumult, and silence and shadows, where all hope is lost, and all living shapes pass away. And many shores, evil and strange it washes, and many islands of danger and fear infest it. I will not darken your hearts, son of Middle-earth, with the tale of my labor 7 years in the great sea from the north even into the south, but never to the west, for that is shut against us. At the last, in black despair, weary of all the world, we turned and fled from the doom that so long had spared us, only to strike us the more cruelly. For even as we descried a mountain from afar, and I cried, Lo, there is Taras, and the land of my birth, the wind awoke, and great clouds thunder-laden came up from the west. Then the waves hunted us like living things filled with malice, and the lightning smote us, and when we were broken down to a helpless hull, the seas leaped upon us in fury. But as you see, I was spared, for it seemed to me that there came a wave greater and yet calmer than all the others, and it took me and lifted me from the ship, and bore me high upon its shoulders, and rolling to the land, it cast me upon the turf, and then drained away, pouring back over the cliff in a great waterfall. There but 1 hour had I sat when you came upon me, still dazed by the sea, and still I feel the fear of it, and the bitter loss of all my friends that went with me so long and so far beyond the sight of mortal lands. Ronwe sighed, and spoke then softly as if to himself, but very bright with the stars upon the margin of the world, when at times the clouds above the west were drawn aside, yet whether we saw only clouds still more remote, or glimpsed indeed, as some held, the mountains of the Pelori, of the lost strands of our home, I know not. Far, far away they stand, and none from mortal land shall come there ever again, I deem. Then Voronwe fell silent, for night had come, and the stars shone white and cold. Soon after, Tuor and Voronwe arose and turned their backs toward the sea, and set out upon their long journey in the dark, of which there is little to tell, for the shadow of Ulmo was upon Tuor, and none saw them pass, by wood or stone, by field or fen, between the setting and the rising of the sun. But ever warily they went, shunning the night-eyed hunters of Morgoth, and forsaking the trodden ways of elves and men. Voronwe chose their path, and Tuor followed. He asked no vain questions, but noted well that they went ever eastward along the march of the rising mountains, and turned never southward, at which he wondered, for he believed, as did well nigh all elves and men, that Turgon dwelt far from the battles of the north. Slow was their going by twilight or by night in the pathless wilds, and the fell winter came down swiftly from the realm of Morgoth. despite the shelter of the hills, the winds were strong and bitter, and soon the snow lay deep upon the heights, or whirled through the passes, and fell upon the woods of Nuath ere the full shedding of their withered leaves. Thus, though they set out before the middle of Narquile, the Hisimir came in with biting frost even as they drew nigh to the sources of Narog. There, at the end of a weary night, in the grey of dawn they halted, and Voronwe was dismayed, looking down about him in grief and fear. Where once the fair pool of Ivrin had lain in its great stone basin, carved by falling waters, and all about it had been a tree-clad hollow under the hills, now he saw a land defiled and desolate. The trees were burned or uprooted, and the stone marges of the pool were broken, so that the waters of Ivrin strayed and wrought a great barren marsh amid the ruin. All now was but a welter of frozen mire, and a reek of decay lay like a foul mist upon the ground. Alas, has the evil come even here? Voronoi cried. Once far from the threat of Engban was this place, but ever the fingers of Morgoth grope further. It is even as Ulmo spoke to me, said Tuor. The springs are poisoned, and my power withdraws from the waters of the land. Yet, said Voronoi, a malice has been here with strength greater than that of orcs. Fear lingers in this place. And he searched about the edges of the mire, until suddenly he stood still and cried again, Yea, a great evil! And he beckoned to Tuor, and Tuor coming saw a slot like a huge furrow that passed away southward, and at either side, now blurred, now sealed, hard and clear by frost, the marks of great clawed feet. See, said Voronoi, and his face was pale with dread and loathing. Here not long since was the great worm of Engban, most fell of all the creatures of the enemy. Late already is our errand to Turgon. There is need of haste. Even as he spoke thus, they heard a cry in the woods, and they stood still as grey stones listening. But the voice was a fair voice, though filled with grief, and it seemed that it called ever upon a name, as one that searches for another who is lost. And as they waited, one came through the trees, and they saw that he was a tall man, armed, clad in black, with a long sword drawn, and they wondered, for the blade of the sword also was black, but the edges shone bright and cold. Woe was graven in his face, and when he beheld the ruin of Ivrin, he cried aloud in grief, saying, Ivrin, Failivrin, Gwyndor and Beleg, here once I was healed, but now never shall I drink the draught of peace again. Then he went swiftly away towards the north, as one in pursuit or on an errand of great haste, and they heard him cry, Failivrin, Findulas, until his voice died away in the woods. But they knew not that Nargothrond had fallen, and that this was Turin, son of Hurin, the Black Sword. Thus only for a moment, and never again, did the paths of those kinsmen, Turin and Tuor, draw together. When the Black Sword had passed, Tuor and Voronwe held on their way for a while, though day had come, for the memory of his grief was heavy upon them, and they could not endure to remain beside the defilement of Ivrin. But before long they sought a hiding place, for all the land was filled now with a foreboding of evil. They slept little and uneasily, and as the day wore it grew dark, and a great snow fell, and with the night came a grinding frost. Thereafter the snow and ice relented not at all, and for 5 months the fell winter long remembered held the north in bonds. Now Tuor and Voronwe were tormented by the cold, and feared to be revealed by the snow to hunting enemies, or to fall into hidden dangers treacherously cloaked. 9 days they held on, ever slower and more painfully, and Voronwe turned somewhat north until they crossed the 3 well streams of Teiglin, and then he bore eastward again, leaving the mountains, and went warily until they passed Glithui, and came to the stream of Malduin, and it was frozen black. Then Tuor said to Voronwe, "Fell is this frost, and death draws near to me, if not to you." For they were now in evil case. It was long since they had found any food in the wild, and the way-bread was dwindling, and they were cold and weary. "Ill is it to be trapped between the doom of the Valar and the malice of the enemy," said Voronwe. "Have I escaped the mouths of the sea but to lie under the snow?" But Tuor said, "How far is it now to go? For at last, Voronwe, you must forego your secrecy with me. Do you lead me straight, and whither? For if I must spend my last strength, I would know to what that may avail." "I have led you as straight as I safely might," answered Voronwe. "Know then now that Turgon dwells still in the north of the land of the Eldar, though that is believed by few. Already we draw nigh to him, yet there are many leagues still to go, even as a bird might fly, and for us Sirion is yet to cross, and great evil maybe lies between. For we must come soon to the highway that ran of old down from the Minas of King Finrod to Nargothrond. There the servants of the enemy will walk and watch."
"I counted myself the hardiest of men," said Tuor, "and I have endured many winters' woe in the mountains. But I had a cave at my back, and fire then, and I doubt now my strength to go much further thus hungry through the fell weather. But let us go on as far as we may before hope fails." "No other choice have we," said Voronwe, "unless it be to lay us down here and seek the snow sleep." Therefore all through the bitter day they toiled on, deeming the peril of foes less than the winter. But ever as they went they found less snow, for they were now going southward again down into the Vale of Sirion, and the mountains of Dorloman were left far behind. In the deepening dusk they came to the high way at the bottom of a tall wooded bank,